why don't I start that? So I'd like to introduce our workshop leader, Bronson Jacque, who will be teaching us how to use the 3D computer graphics software Blender. Bronson is an Inuit visual artist who grew up in Postville, Nunatsiavut. Bronson is completing his bachelor's degree in fine arts at NSCAD and works as a contributing editor for the Inuit Art Foundation. He is passionate about multidisciplinary arts, delving into many mediums, but specializes in oil painting portraits. Like I said, this workshop will be recorded and we will post the video on YouTube afterwards so that you all have a reference. But I believe Bronson is inviting everyone to follow along today using Blender on their own computer as well. And the workshop will run for roughly 1 hour. And then afterwards we have some time for questions as well. Yeah, Bronson, why don't you take over?
Hey everyone, looking forward to seeing what everyone makes by the end of the tutorial. It's my first time doing any sort of like tutorial of a computer program, so if anybody finds that I'm going a bit too fast or if they'd like me to just hold on for a bit, just speak up or type in the chat and Maggie or Michelle will let me know. Yeah, don't hesitate to let me know, like you need some time to work on something or you need something clarified. There's also a few things that I have made that would help you do it on your own. So I've made a few graphs just to show the workflow. And so if you use this, it might help a bit more for when you make your own. It'll get a little bit complicated if you haven't used Blender before. So something like this is a bit simplified with things like this. And if you ever wanted to refer back, the recording will be posted online. And yeah, it's hopefully everyone learns a few things today. Also, I can't see the chat, so I'm not sure if I open up that. Yeah, if anyone who needs anything, just let Maggie know or speak up and I'll address it. I'm assuming everyone here has not used Blender before, since it's like an intro to Blender. Has anybody used the program before?
Doesn't look like it. I don't think so.
Okay, sounds good. So assuming everyone has like Blender downloaded and everything, I'm gonna open up a new file. And so when you open up Blender, you'll be introduced to this page. Here are the recent projects that I've been working on. And we'll be starting off with the general file. And so this is the default cube. Like as soon as you open up Blender, this cube will always be here. We won't be using it today because we'll be making an Igloo as this one right here. So by the end of this, we'll have something that looks like this. And yeah, we'll start off here in the new file. So if you have Blender open, oh, I guess I should go into like navigation. So when you first use Blender, it might be a bit weird trying to figure out how to navigate the layout. So if you wanted to zoom in, you'll use the scroll wheel. You'll just zoom in by scrolling up. You'll zoom out by scrolling down. And it will zoom in towards the object that you have selected. And so if you want to rotate around, you'll click down on the scroll wheel and move side to side. If you wanted to navigate without rotating and you wanted to like see a different angle by maybe going to the left, you'll hold Shift, hold in on the scroll wheel, and then drag. So that way you're moving around without rotating, again, to rotate around, you just click down on the scroll wheel and spin around like that. So that's the basics of moving your viewport around Blender. Now, to move the object, you'll make sure that you're in object mode in the top left corner. Today we'll be using object mode, edit mode, and sculpt mode. But right now, just to show you guys how to move the object around, we'll stay in object mode. Make sure that it's highlighted. So there'll be an orange border around a cube. Move it up. You click on this or press G. And there will be, this is something you'll see in moving, rotating, and scaling. So when you want to move it, there'll be an up and two different directional arrows. And so if you use the blue arrow, you click on that and drag up, it'll go directly vertical. If you click on either the red or the green, it'll go in either direction in a straight line. You'll notice these squares as well. And so if you wanted to click that and go up, it'll go in multiple, like not just up or down, left or right. It'll go up in a diagonal. You can spin it around like that. And you can also grab this white circle and you have a bit more freedom with where it'll go. It's not just down, left, right. Okay, I'm gonna put that back. So if you want to delete it, you just hit delete. And then to bring it back, you go up to the add, mesh, cube, and then you get it back again. So if you ever delete the default cube and you want it back, you just find add, mesh, cube. And so the second thing that you'll be using is rotate. The shortcut for rotate is R. So if you just click R, you can spin it around like this, but it'll only be, it'll depend on the way you're looking at it in the viewport, which way it'll rotate. So we'll be using the circle that pops up here. So just like with the move, there'll be a blue, green, and red. So the blue, you make sure you click on that, and it'll spin around like that on one plane. If you click the red, it'll tumble forward or backwards. And the green does the same, forward or backwards, another direction. And with this white circle, it's, again, depending on where you're facing in the viewport. And you can always just Control Z to go back. So if you do something you didn't want, like you moved it in a place you didn't like, you can press Control Z and bring it back. And if you wanted to put it back there, Control Shift Z. Okay, so that is the basics of using the viewport and moving the object in object mode. Next is edit mode. So in edit mode, you'll see that there's a bit more options that come up. This circle in here is the origin. And so this origin will decide how your object will rotate and how it'll scale. So we always want to have the origin in the middle of the square. But if it ever goes out of the square and you find it hard to rotate, you go in here. The origin is fine right now. Okay. Now, something that we'll be doing is editing the material with vertices, which is this one up here, little dot. And so when edit mode and this is selected, is the vertex. And so you can click on individual points of your object. And so right now, you can see that this point is in orange, and that means that you're now editing that selection. So just like in object mode, you have move, rotate, and scale. And so if we click move, we'll be moving the vertex in different directions. And so if you click multiple, you can hold down shift and click another one, and that selects multiple. And so you can go up and down with both. And if you drag over, you select everything that you just highlighted. And so then you can click that. Okay, and so that's how to use the vertex. I'm just going to delete that and get another default cube so nothing's out of sorts. I'm going to go back into edit mode. And the other thing that you can edit is the edges. So if you click edge, now you can select the individual edges. You can also select multiple by dragging over, or you can select ones, like specific ones, by holding shift and clicking. Again, you can hold and then move them up side to side. You can rotate it. So you can get all these funky shapes depending on what you want to do with the editing. The last option you have is the face. So in edit mode and face, you can select individual faces. You can drag over to get multiple faces, or you can hold shift and select specific faces. Again, you can also move it to certain faces, and it'll only move those faces and whatever's connected to it. You can rotate it, and it will twist the faces as such. Okay, so that's the basics of edit mode. So in edit mode, there's vertex, face, and edge. Does everyone feel like I'm going at a good pace right now? I'm going too fast. Is there anything you need clarified? Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to get rid of the default cube, because for an igloo, we're going to want a sphere. And to get a sphere, you go into object mode again, go to add, mesh, UV sphere, and then this sphere will pop up. Oftentimes you could mistake it for the circle, but the circle just opens up this 2D circle on a single plane. So we don't want that. We'll be going with the UV sphere. And so you can see that there are multiple faces on the sphere. There are a lot more edges and vertexes compared to the default cube. And so there's a lot more that you can do depending on how many faces, edges, and vertex there are. And so when you initially load up a different mesh, delete this mesh. Okay. You have the option of deciding how many faces, subdivisions there are. So if we open up the cube again, you can find down in the bottom left corner, there's this little box that appears. It'll only be there when you first open up the cube. So you can look around at everything and it's fine, but the moment you move it, it changes. So it'll be, you can fine tune where it is here, but for making sure that, for changing the subdivisions, when it first opens up and it says add cube or add UV sphere or anything like that, you expand it and you can adjust the size like that. And you can adjust its location like that. But what we'll be using today is the UV sphere, and there are more options in this. So there are the segments, rings, and radius. There's also location and rotation as well, but with the segments, it'll be adjusting how many faces are around the circle. So if you increase it, it'll become really smooth with many, many faces. And if you go all the way down to 3 faces, it'll basically be a triangle. And then, yeah, you can basically make it as complicated as you want or as simple as you want by adjusting these. And as soon as you move it, it's gone. So when we're starting off this igloo, we want to make sure that as soon as we open up the UV sphere, we get our segments, rings, and radius correct. So when I went through making this tutorial, I found that the best way to make it is with 12 segments. So you type in 12, hit enter, and now you have 12 segments all the way around. And for the rings, I should explain what the rings are. So the rings are how many are on the vertical dimension. So going to 3, there's 1, 2, 3. Again. Sphere. And so we want to make this into 14. So we'll see 14 different sections on the vertical plane. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 14. Something else that would help with navigating the viewport, I just remembered, is this little button up here. So with this, you can look at it from perfectly on the left side. You click the Y, you'll look at it from a different angle. Z, you'll look at it perfectly from the top down. So this is different than like a perspective. So if you click down on the scroll wheel and then navigate around, you go back into a perspective view. And click Z, it's going to look at everything there as if it was perfectly top down. So it's not a realistic view, but you can see everything perfectly from the top. If you click it again, you'll see it from the bottom. So that's something that would be helpful to remember. So the blue lines up with Z is the vertical. The green lines up with the Y, which is on the left and right. X is another one, front to back. And so you can view it in different ways, like that. Okay, so now we have the UV sphere with the correct amount of segments, rings, and now we want to have the proper radius so that it has the actual scale of real-life igloo. So I went on Google and looked at a few different pictures of igloos and I compared them to the people around, and I found that on average an igloo is about 6 feet tall from the ground to the top. In Blender, the default is meters. You can change it and set it in the preferences, but for now we're just going to keep it in meters just to keep it simple. And so in radius, we're going to change it to 2 meters. So that will make it so that from center to top is 2 meters, which is about 6 feet. So now we have a sphere that's 12 feet from end to end. So now it's all good with the object that we're starting out with. And what we're going to do now is go into the front on view by clicking on the Y. We're going to go back to edit mode. And now everything's highlighted, everything's selected. If you click out of it, nothing's going to be selected. But if you wanted to select everything again, you go up into select all. And so now the whole object is selected. Now, another thing that you're going to find in the viewport is the different ways that you're going to be able to see it. So there is up here in the right corner, top right corner, there is the wireframe. So with the wireframe, you'll see right through the object, and you'll see all of the edges, vertexes, and faces right through. So if you click vertex, it'll show you all of the vertex that there are. All the faces, all the edges, all the vertex. If you click here, click one vertex, highlight another vertex. It'll show you the face that's contained within those vertex. It'll show you the edges that's connected to those. And so that's how you select a certain area in wireframe. Something to remember with wireframe is that if you drag over, it'll go right through and select both sides. So when you're editing your materials, when you're trying to edit the igloo and like cut out one side for the entrance, and You do not want to have it in wireframe mode, because as soon as you select something and you want to delete it, it'll delete both sides. Control Z to bring it back. Right here is solid mode. So that's the mode that we're going to be using when we're cutting holes on one side. So faces, like that, delete faces. So that just deletes one side of it. Again, if you go back to the wireframe and you select this, delete faces, it'll go right through. So that's something that's going to be important while you're editing your materials. The next view is shaded. So it'll show what it looks like with the shadows, highlights, but it is less graphically intensive as the next level, which is render, which calculates a lot more variables like the reflection of the light and how it absorbs into the materials. So for now, we're going to avoid this fourth option here, because if you're following along, it's very hard on the computer once it gets more complicated. I'll just give an example of that with the finished version. So this is shader, solid, wireframe, and now with render, it'll show everything with the glow, the different lights that's there, and it'll get very slow depending on like how fast your hardware is. So you'll navigate around, it'll take a while to show you what's there. And so we do not want to be using render mode until we're ready to actually render the final image. Go into solid mode. As you can see, it's a lot quicker to navigate around. Wireframe mode is even quicker. Normally shader is where you start to see it slow down, because it's still calculating where the lights are. So we're going to stick with solid and wireframe for now. Okay, so back to this UV sphere where we're going to make the base of the igloo. What we're going to do now, because igloos aren't just a round ball out in the land, we want to make it so that it's half of a sphere. So in edit mode, we're going to go to vertex. We're going to highlight everything underneath the line, green line. So once this is all highlighted in wireframe mode, everything on the bottom half will be highlighted. And then you click delete faces, delete vertices. And so now everything underneath the horizon line is gone. And so now we have a dome. So this is where it'll start looking a bit more like an igloo. But right now it's paper thin. And that's how all your models will be until you shape it and add different modifiers like Solidify, which is the next thing that we will do. So now that you have your base, we're ready to go into modifiers. So in the right-hand corner of Blender, you'll see all of these icons. Each of these icons brings you to different menus. It can get very overwhelming and confusing. Google and YouTube is a very big help when you're having a bit of trouble navigating. So each of these icons brings up a new menu that does different things in Blender. But for now, what we're going to do is go to the modifier properties, which is the wrench. We're going to go in to add modifier and solidify. Sorry about that. Before we add the modifier, what we're going to do is select the sphere. Because if you don't have it selected, it won't know what to add the modifier to. So again, I'm going to delete the vertices, and then to select the whole dome, go up into select all, and now you can see that the dome is selected because it's in orange. And now if we add modifier within the wrench modifier preferences, there's so many different things you can do. You can make it like skin, you can screw through it, multi-resolution, all of these different things. You can explore it in on your own time, because there's endless amounts of things that you can do with the modifiers. But we're going to go to Solidify. And so in Solidify, it'll make it so that it's no longer paper thin. You can see that it's got a little bit of thickness there now. But still, it's too thin. And so what we're going to do is adjust the thickness right here. So after you click Solidify, it'll come up with these options here. You can expand them, and there's very fine-tuned adjustments that you can make. But right now, you can see thickness. And if you slide this up, it'll make the dome's thickness bigger, smaller. If you go into negatives, it'll go outwards, but we don't want that because then the faces are on the inside, and it causes a lot of complications when you go into texturing and coloring the material. So when you do thickness, you want it to go inwards and have a certain thickness, everything in these files that I'm going to have sent out to you. So you'll have this to refer back to on your own time. So currently we've already went object mode, made the UV sphere with 12 segments, 14 rings, and a 2-meter radius. In edit mode, we deleted all the vertices underneath the ground plane, which is how we got the dome. And so now the modifiers, we're going to have Solidify, Subdivision, and Displace. Within Solidify, the thickness, 0.2 meters, which is what it's at there now. Offset, keep it at -1, and these should be okay by default. You don't want to click on even thickness, fill, only rim, or anything like that. Right now it's fine for what we're doing. The only thing you're going to want to adjust besides thickness and Solidify is within edge data. So within edge data, you'll see you can expand it like this. We'll keep these minimized just to keep it less complicated. Do this with the correct amounts. So crease inner, we're going to set all the way to 1. Outer, 0.389. So you can click on it and type in the value that you want. So 0.389. And then with rim, it's going to be 0.467. If you're doing this on your own and you want to adjust it a little bit to have your own look, these aren't things that have to be exactly those numbers. You can adjust it how you want to make it look. If you want to make the igloo smaller or bigger, you make sure the radius of the initial UV sphere is bigger or smaller. And so all these things you can play around with and get the look that you want. But right now, in Solidify, you want to make sure your thickness is at 0.2 meters. With an edge data, crease inner is at 1, outer is at 0.389, rim is at 0.467. And with that, we're done with the Solidify modifier. And so we can collapse that so that we don't have to look at that anymore. And so right now you'll have a dome with a thickness of 0.2 meters from the outside to the inside. So now this is looking a bit more like an igloo. It's still really sharp, as you can tell. Like there's points, and that's not realistic. Nothing in real life has a perfect point like this. You can zoom right in, and it's just going to keep getting sharper and sharper. So the next modifier that we're going to add is the Subdivision Modifier. And so what that does is so that each of these faces can become your own thing. I'll give you an example real quick of just subdividing one face. So in edit mode, face, you can click on one face, right click, and go to subdivide, and then that'll make it into different sections. And again, you'll have a menu that opens up in the bottom left corner, and you can adjust how many cuts you want. So 1 cut gives you 4 subdivisions, 2 cuts give you 9, and then so on until you get more and more and more divisions. Right now we don't need just a random subdivide, so we'll undo that. And we'll go back to Add Modifier, click on Subdivision Surface, and that brings up Subdivision. So this makes it so that the Igloo is not so sharp. It gives it a bit more resolution. If you imagine a monitor, like a TV or anything like that, like 1080p, 1440p, 4K, and things like that, it's basically just making the subdivisions smaller, giving you more pixels. If you imagine this as pixels, it's giving you 4 pixels for each face. And so you can give it more and more and more until it's a perfectly smooth ball. But we don't want that either, because when you make an igloo, it's made out of these different blocks. So within subdivision, we're going to keep it at Catmull Clark. And in this paper that's going to be sent out to you, make sure it's in subdivision, Catmull Clark. In the view levels viewport, we're going to have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. In render, it's going to be 2. And in advanced, so we bring this down, make sure that the quality is 3, smooth, keep corners, everything's good there. So we'll collapse the subdivision like that. And so the last modifier that we'll be adding is the Displace Modifier. So again, I'm going to add modifier. Find the displace. Okay, so within Displace, this is going to make your object have texture. So instead of going in and adjusting all of the vertices to make it bumpy in every little place, as you know, like when you're packing in snow, you'll have like little places where your fingers pressed in, where your palms pressed in. It's going to be imperfect, an imperfect surface. So within Displace, we can make it so that it has those without having to fine tune it ourselves. And so after making a displacement modifier, we're going to go into the textures by clicking on this little option here. We're going to click new first, which makes a new displacement texture. So after clicking displace, make a new displacement. It's going to be by default texture 1. We're going to name it snow. And so with the displacement, I'm going to leave it as is right now with the strength of 1, just to show you what it'll look like with a really high strength. It'll make it really bumpy. So after you make your displacement modifier, we're going to click on this right here, and it's going to bring us to the texture properties. And so within texture properties is where you'll be able to put in like different images. You can add different displacement textures. Right now it's on image or movie. So if we wanted to add something like an image onto the igloo, which is not what we want to do right now, you click on new, find the image that you want to put on, and then it would just be a flat image over the igloo. But what we're going to do is we're going to click on image or movie, and then it brings down this little list of different kinds of textures that you can put on. We're going to click clouds. And so what that does is it gives a cloud texture to your igloo. We're going to make sure that in texture it says noise basis, Blender original, type, soft, grayscale, size. I'm going to bring it down to 0 because we're going to adjust how bumpy it is later in shading. Everything's good there. So this covers everything that's in this image here. All of the settings and fine adjustments you'll find here. Let's add it. And at this point, you should have a dome that looks like this. This is a render, shader, solid, and wireframe. So it's a bit more complicated looking than when we first started because of the modifiers that we added. It gives it a bit more depth, gives it a bit more customizations to make it look the way we want it. But right now, it's looking pretty good as is. Now, what we're going to do is make it look like it's different blocks put together. And so the easiest way to do this is to make sure that you're in edit mode, go to faces, and okay, hold on, I went one step too far. What we're going to do is we're going to go to wireframe. We're going to look at it from the side, so we're looking at it in this perspective. We're going to make sure that we're in face edit mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to select one row of the dome. So it's going to look like this if you have it selected correctly. One band is going to be selected. And what we're going to do is we're going to separate it from the dome, because right now Blender's treating this as one solid dome. It's going to imagine it as being all connected. All the edges are basically welded together. So what we need to do is separate them. And how we do that is by right-clicking and clicking split. Another thing you can do is just click Y. So within Blender, there's a lot of different hotkeys that you can learn, and it makes your workflow a lot faster. So if you can master that, it's going to make your time in Blender a lot easier. So what we just did there is separated this row from everything else. And what we're going to do is do the same thing with every second row. Select that row, right click, split. Select this row here, right click, split. And so now if you go into solid view, you're going to have these different rings around the igloo, which is good if you make an igloo by sculpting the entire row and then building another and putting it on top like that. But what we need is it to look like it's different blocks, which is why we made it with these sections going down each side. So we can, at this point, we can look at it in solid mode. We can, making sure we're in face mode, we click one face at a time. And the fastest way to do this is click a face and press Y. And so now you've made a block. So that looks a bit more like when you make an igloo with like the different blocks. And so you go around and then you click on faces and keep splitting them until your entire structure is made of blocks. I don't have an easy way to do this, a quick way to do this. So it's basically you go around, click each face and press Y to split them. And you're building your igloo with blocks at that point. The quickest way is to like skip one and do it in like a checkerboard pattern so that you don't just click one here, click one here, click one here. You only have to click half of them if you skip. So there, that breaks up the one in the middle. If we click here, split that one, it breaks up the one in the middle as well. So you just continue until all of the blocks are split. Again, I'm just clicking on the face and pressing Y. And that's breaking up all the blocks. With the top part, we're going to keep that as is because we don't want a bunch of triangles on top of the igloo. Okay, so at this point, your igloo should be made into a dome of many blocks. What we're going to do now is we're going to stagger them. So instead of having them stacked up one on top of each other in a straight line like this, what we're going to do is shuffle them a little bit, and this is going to be where we use the rotate tool. So we're going to go back to the wireframe mode. We're going to make sure that we're still in the face select mode. Again, we're going to select one row of the igloo, and then we're going to look at it from top down. So click on the Z, and then we're looking at it from the top, and we can see that the whole ring is selected. And then sometimes your edit mode will collapse, and what you'll do is click on this little arrow. So it'll bring out this again. And so what we're going to do is click on rotate. And so now, since everything's split and it's disconnected from the different rows, we can adjust the layer by, oh, looks like, oh, everything's good. So what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this until it's about there. So the seam is in the middle of the other plane, in the middle of the other face. And so an easy way to figure out if it's in the middle is when you're in wireframe mode, you can tell the middle of each face by this little dot. And so that indicates the direct center of each plane. And so if you have this seam line up with the dot, that means that your seam is lined up with the center of the other plane. And so now we're going to look at the side again, select the next row, and do the same thing with that. Grab the blue circle, and then rotate until it's about there. And then that one's staggered. And now it's looking a bit more natural, looking a bit more like it should. We're going to grab the top row here and do the same thing. Z to look at top down. Make sure it's in rotate. Click the blue circle so that it only rotates on a single plane. And then now you have an igloo that has a bunch of different blocks in the staggered orientation. I'm just going to show you real quick what would happen if you didn't click on the blue circle for rotating. It'll spin it around like this. And so we don't want that. Same thing with this. Okay, so now at this point, if you go into shaded mode, you'll have this dome that looks like it's made out of different blocks. Now, what we need to do is make the entrance, because right now nobody can get inside, and we want to make sure that someone can get in and enjoy the igloo. And so I found that what we could do is a really slow way, but I found it to be a bit more tedious than it needed to be, which is you can make individual blocks, but it just takes too much time. But just to show you, that's what happens if you leave the strength up at 1. So I said I was going to show you what it looked like leaving it just at a strength of 1 earlier. That's what it looks like. So we want to turn this down. I remember exactly what number we had it at in displacement. We had it 0.02 at the strength. So we're going to turn that down to 0.02. And then in the mid-level, we're going to have that 0.024. So 0.024. Now it's not crazy bumpy or anything like that. Now, just to show you what it would look like to make blocks by itself for the entrance in object mode, you know how you can make the default cube by clicking mesh and cube. You can make that into a little rectangular block by using scale and just dragging it out like that. And that's a big rectangle, but you can make it smaller by clicking on this and then scaling it down and making it look more like one of the blocks. But this requires too much time. There's a much faster way of doing it, and that is to select a part of the dome that you've already made. So making sure that your dome's selected, go back to edit mode, wireframe. You're going to select the bottom 2 rows, like this. You're going to select Control C for copying, Control V. Oh, sometimes it doesn't want to work with me there. So make sure that it copies and pastes. Oh, I just want to do wrong. Okay, sorry about that. I was in edit mode and I was trying to select it and copy and paste like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go back into object mode, select all. And so now every object is selected. Now we can copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V. And so now you can tell here that everything is now duplicated. So if it's showing up as red, it means that you have multiple objects selected. So you're going to be editing multiple objects and it's going to be really difficult. But you can tell up in here, which is the scene collection, shows you everything that's in your scene. Right now there's 2 cameras, 2 lights, 2 spheres. It's still called a sphere because we just edited the UV sphere. And so what we want to keep is the 2 spheres. We can delete this second light, select it, click delete, select it, click delete. And then the second sphere is directly within the first sphere. And so what we want to do is rotate it so we can see it properly. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees. So after you rotate, you can, this little part pops up in the bottom left, which you can fine tune the rotation. We're going to do -90. So that makes sure it's on a perfect 90-degree angle. And then we're going to drag it outwards with the move. And so now we have a second dome, but we don't need the whole dome. We just need to make a little entrance. So we're going to do the same thing we did when we removed the bottom half of the UV sphere. We're going to go into wireframe mode, edit mode, and this time we're going to select the top rows, leaving 2 bottom rows, and we're going to delete all of those. And so now we have this ring, but again, we only need the bottom. So right now it's staggered, so we need to line it up again so that it looks. I'm going to open up the completed version. So we want it to look like this, where they're stacked up like next to each other without staggering of the base. And so to do that, we'll do the same thing as we did to stagger. We'll go in, make sure to select edit mode, good. Back to wireframe, select top row, look at it from the front. What we're going to do is rotate it back to being lined up. If you drag outwards, you can more finely tune the adjustment. If it's in here, it's a bit quick. So grab the green circle, pull out, and then fine tune until it's at the edge lining up with the horizontal plane. And now it's back to lining up. So we're going to delete this bottom half just like we did the UV sphere. We're going to go to select all, and so that selects the whole ring again. I'm going to go to wireframe so we make sure we select everything, even what's behind. I'm going to select everything on this bottom part and hit delete faces. And so now we have an archway. It's a bit big, so we're going to select all again. And now we're going to use the scale, which is something we haven't used yet, but this is how we get the entryway. So if we grab this square here and pull inwards, it'll make it smaller. It'll even flip upside down and invert it, but we don't want that. We grab red, and that makes it smaller on the horizontal plane. You can make it bigger on the horizontal plane. We're going to make it a bit this wide. We're going to grab the blue, change the vertical plane, and that looks about right. So now we're going to take it by clicking move. We're going to bring it down. And now it's a bit level. We're going to bring it backwards to meet the base. And so now we have an entryway. I'm just going to make it a little bit longer by clicking on scale again and then pulling outwards. And now we have a longer entryway. Nice. So now you have something that looks like an igloo, but the entryway is blocked off. And to make it realistic, you want to be able to get inside of the igloo. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut a hole in the igloo. And this is something that's important because in a lot of the things that you'll make, you'll have to cut through the materials, and it can get a bit complicated depending on what shapes you have. If you keep it as squares, it's the easiest way to make sure nothing goes haywire. If you have triangles or things with multiple edges, it's always going to be a bit more difficult to edit than squares. If you can keep it so that there's always 4 sides to your faces, it'll make your workflow a lot easier. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to hide the entryway by going up here to sphere 1. I'm just going to rename this by clicking on it, entry. And then we're going to click on that little eye, and that's going to hide the entry. And so right now you can't click on the entry, and so now we're free to work on the dome. Go back to object mode, click it, and now select it again. We're going to look at front on by clicking Y again. And now what we're going to do, we're going to cut the hole for the entryway. So back to edit mode, face, select that, and now we're going to use the subdivide that we spoke about earlier. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it into the number of cuts, 2. And so that way we have a bit more options, because if we just have it in 1 and we delete 1, then it's just going to be on one side. It's going to make it a bit more cuts, so there's more divisions. Now in this bottom one, what we're going to do is we're going to cut it in half. So instead of clicking on this face and then subdividing it, we only need to get rid of half of this square. So there's another tool down here called loop cut. So what you're going to want to do is click loop cut and then click that. And now you have a cut down the middle. You can do the same thing with across like that. And you can increase the number of cuts by clicking on it and then adjusting here. But right now we only need the 1. So we're going to do the same thing to the face on this side. And now what we can do is select these new faces that we just created. Make sure you're in select box, face, delete faces, delete faces. We're going to delete this one as well. And now we have a little arch. We're going to show the entryway again. And now it's a bit better. You can actually get inside. But we're going to get this, push it up inside a little bit. So in edit mode, we're going to click vertex. We're going to select this one and select the other, hold shift, and that'll select both. And so now we could just move it up, but that's just going to make it really close to the vertex, and it's very likely that you'll go on top of the other and then you'll have an inverted plane, which is not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to click scale, and with scale, we can increase the distance between these vertex. Okay. And so now we have a nice little entryway in the igloo. Okay, so now that's all we're going to do with this igloo besides making it look like snow. So if we go on the shader, it's a bit better. Render, it still just looks like clay or some random material. So what we want to do is make this look like snow. And so this part is where you're going to need this file that I sent out. This one. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, and you're pretty much just going to have to follow steps that I have sent out because we're going to be going into nodes. I didn't expect it to go this long with the modeling, but nodes is how we get it to look like snow. And I'll just go into the already made version to show you what I mean by that. Okay, so all this time we were in layout, in the layout window. You can go to different things like the modeling, sculpting, UV editing. There's a lot of different things you can do to make your image perfect, exactly the way you want. What we're going to do is go to the shading menu. And so in the shading menu, that's where we find the nodes, which is this big web of attributes that you give to your materials. By default, I'm just going to add a default cube to show you what its nodes look like. So add cube, Bring it up so we make sure it's selected. No shading. So with the default cube selected, there's no nodes, nothing's there. And if we click new, this is the default nodes. Very basic. It just shows you that it's white. You can change that by making it, you can adjust all the colors here by clicking base color. I think subsurface color is really good for if you wanted to make humans with like a little bit of like color underneath the skin. You can make it so that it looks like there's a bit of a depth to it. But we're not going to go into that right now because making humans is a whole other thing. Right now, what we need to know is that to make it look like snow, we will need to make this. And so going back to the igloo that we made, we go to shading, we click on the object. There's no nodes currently set up. And so what we're going to do now is to make the material snow, click new, and here we have the basics. We're going to rename this as Igloo Snow, and this is where you start adding in the new attributes of your object. And this could take a good while if you're experimenting with it, but I went through this a couple of times and I found a shader node layout that works really good for making it look like snow. So this is going to be sent out to you and it'll show you all of the different values that you'll need. So it'll show you what's connected, how much you need to increase the scale, what settings to go into. So for right now, I'm just going to show you how to add them, and then for fine-tuning it later on, I'm just going to send out the file because we're already gone for a bit of time there now. So to add nodes, what we're going to do is click Shift A, and that gives you the add, and you can search. So this is where there's so many different things you can search for in here, but what we're going to look for is color ramp. That can give us a gradient in the material. So search color ramp. Here we go. We're going to leave that there. We're going to click Shift Add, do displacement. Keep that there. And so if you look here, there's 3 different bumps. And so the bumps is going to show you like the different imperfections in the snow. So if I go back here to the pre-made igloo and you click Control Shift click bump, it'll show you what that does. So if you're wondering what you're messing around with in the nodes, Control Shift click, and then it'll bring up that aspect. So if you increase the strength, you'll see some things change, some things very slightly. Let's see if I can find something that's a bit more noticeable. Yes, so sliding these different sliders around is very hard to tell what you're doing if you're not looking at it by Control Shift clicking. And that brings up the viewer. To know that you're looking at something, this little part right here is going to pop up with viewer. Control Shift click Principled BSD will just show you what it looks like after all is inputted. And so color ramp, it'll show you the different variations in the color. Clicking here, there's 2 different values that it's going to be going in between. So snow has a nice little blue hue to it if you look at it up close. So we need to make sure that it's not just black and white, which is what the default will be. And that's why we have these black shadows. I'm going to click on this and then click down here. And then we can bring up value and then make it a little bit blue. It's a little bit too dark right now. And that's fine for now. But right now, you see nothing's happening in your Igloo because right now it's not connected to the output, which is here. This is what decides what is being shown on the screen. Like before, you can click base color and change everything, make a pink Igloo if you want. But what we want is to have a gradient. So we're going to drag color to base color. And so now that gives us a bit of a blue hue instead of a black. And so that's all we need to do there. With displacement, we're going to connect that to the displacement of material output. So you click on displacement and you drag it over and then let go here. So that's the basics of how to connect different shader nodes to each other. If you want to disconnect, you click on this, drag it off, and let go, and it's disconnected. It's basically just like wiring things together. And so after adding all of the nodes in, it'll look like this, which is a bit more complicated. But that's how you get this snow texture. And if you're wondering about the glow that's going on inside, I'm just going to show you that real quick in the one that we made this hour. So I'm going to leave the node map as is for now because we can spend another 20 minutes just doing that. But all you got to remember is Shift A, search, and then you'll find everything that you need here in this little search bar. So really quickly, I'm just going to show you how to put the lighting in because that's one of the really important aspects of making this model, is having a nice glow inside. So you can see right now that this part, the entryway, is separate from the base. Well, we want to always make sure that the snow is connected so they share attributes. So what we're going to do is we are going to click on this in object mode, shift click the base, and now both is connected. We're going to click F3, and this is where you can add different attributes to different objects. So F3, join, right click that, and now that makes one solid object. So now it's going to share like everything you do. So if we lift it, it's going to go together. Without joining it, it would go by itself like this. And so we want this to share the same attributes as this, so it both looks like snow. So we go click on this entryway in object mode. We go to texture. No, sorry. We go to material properties, which is the little circle here, second from the bottom in this menu. And you can see that we have a material already made. But what we want is to add, click new, and now we can select on the Igloo snow that we made earlier. So what you make in shading, that we named the Igloo snow, that will also go into the material properties. And so you can assign it to different things. The material that's on top will be the one that shows. So we're going to click on this base material 1, negative. Just going to remove it. And so now Igloo snow shows through. So now we can tell that it's the same material on both. And so the next thing that you're going to want to do to make it look like it's glowing, as in this one here, with a nice orange glow coming out of it, we're going to have to put a light inside of our Igloo, like as if there's a little candle or fire going on inside. And so to add lights to your scene, you're going to go object mode, add, you scroll down to light. We're going to put a point light inside. And so what that does is it gives you this little light, and you can change all of the attributes. Once you add in this light, and I have it selected. So you click the point, that's the little light you made. There's a light bulb here where you can adjust the colors, the intensity, everything. You can make it like a sun. Right now we're using point. And so changing the color to an orange, that'll give us the nice little candlelight fire look. Right now it's really, really dim because it's only the equivalent of a 10-watt light bulb. We're going to increase it, and that'll make it brighter and brighter and brighter. Like so. So now it looks like there's something lit on the inside. It's not showing through currently because we haven't finished making the node map here, which is what we need to do to make it a bit transparent so that the light shines through the cracks. So I'm not sure how much more time we have, so I don't know if I can go into that right now. But if you go into shading and you fill out this web, make sure all of the attributes are correct. Just match them up, scales, everything. It'll look like this. Okay. You can move the light around the same way you'd move around the other objects by clicking on point, forward, back, up, move around just like that. And so right now the Igloo is just floating in space. And so what we're going to do is add land. So in object mode, we're going to add mesh plane. And it's really just a small little square right now. We're going to increase the size until we have a plane here. We can add the snow texture that we made for the Igloo to the plane as well. By clicking on the plane, going to material properties, clicking down in the options, Igloo snow. And so now it shares the same properties. So now when the Igloo looks like snow from making the shaders, so will the ground. And so right now you can see that our area is lit just with ambient occlusion. And so what we want is to make it like a night scene. So here's another light. You can see it right here, light. We're going to delete that. And so it made things a lot darker, but still it has a bit of a glow to it. And that's because in Blender, by default, there's going to be this ambient occlusion setting turned on. So if you look in the background, there's the gray. It's basically lighting it as if there was a very dull light everywhere. We don't want that right now. So what we're going to do is go into the world setting. Difficult to find sometimes. And make sure we're in. Okay, here we go. If you see the camera, that's for rendering. It gives you all of the properties for making your final render. So what we're going to do is going to ambient occlusion. I'm going to turn the factor down, trace down, and we're going to change the render engine to cycles. Go back to world, strength down to 0. And now it's as if it's night. So this right here is the adjustments for the world, which is all of the area outside of the object that you made. And so right now you can't see anything outside of the Igloo, which is because there's no lights. We deleted the light that was in there by default. The only light currently is the one inside of the Igloo. So we're going to have to add one more light. So object mode, add light, and put another point light in, bring it up, and now the Igloo is lit by another light. If you wanted to make it look like there's northern lights or something around, you can change it to green. You can move it away. You can add another light. Drag it up. You can make this one purple. Add another light. Make this one blue. And so you can make it look like there's northern lights above by adding these lights. And if you're not seeing all of the what's going on here on your end, it's because I'm in render mode currently. If I'm in wireframe mode, you're not going to see the lights. If you're in solid mode, you're not going to see the lights. Same with shading mode. You'll only see the light effect in render mode, which is why it's the most difficult to run. It'll slow down your computer a bit, but it's how you'll find out what lighting situation you want to have. Besides that, it's basically the only thing left that I could teach you that you need to know is how to sculpt the land. So we're going to go back to solid mode. We're going to click on the plane. We're going to go to edit mode. And we're just going to subdivide it so that there are many squares. It'll only go up to 10 by default. So you're going to click it again, select all. We're going to subdivide again. And now you can see that there's many surfaces that you can adjust. And so that's what you'll need to be able to sculpt it to look like it's flowing. So after you get your plane with all of the different faces, we're going to go into the next mode that we haven't gone into yet. We've gone into object edit, and then we're going to go into sculpt. So in sculpt mode is where you can basically treat the plane as if it's clay. There's different options here. If you hold your mouse over it, it will show you what they do. This will make it sharp. This will treat it like you're building up clay. This will make it like you're building up clay strips. Oh, right now it's in mirror mode, which is sometimes on there by default. You can see it on the X, Y, or Z axis. We're going to remove that right now so that you're only sculpting one area. If you wanted to have it symmetrical, mirrored on both sides, you go up there and click something. You can click it on the Y so then it does both the X and Y axis. You could do the Z as well, but since the plane's on just a 2D surface, we're not going to use Z. It wouldn't really change. It's not what we need right now. So I'm going to take all of the symmetrical mirroring. And so I'm going to click inflate. And so what that does is it builds up the plane as if you're like inflating it. What the name says is what this does. And so right now it doesn't affect a very large area. So what we're going to do is go to radius, drag it over, and then that changes the size of your brush. So you can affect a larger area. It stops at 500 pixels, but you can type in anything you want and make it as big of an effective area as you want. So this is how you'll make the different hills and mounds and snow drifts on your plane. You go into sculpt mode, you'll use the different tools that you want to just play around with the plane and make it look as you want. Building up the different little mounds, you just click and swipe and it pulls up the plane as if it's like a little snowbank. You can do the same thing and have it reverse by holding shift and clicking. It'll bring it down. So to reverse your selection, to reverse the effect, if you leave it, just hold and click, it'll build it up. If you press shift and then click, it'll bring it back down. So if you built your snowbank too high, you can just shift click and bring it down, and just click without shift and bring it up. The strength here makes it so that the effect happens quicker. So instead of clicking and swiping and taking a while to build up, if you bring the strength up to 1, it'll build it up very quickly. And you can bury your Igloo really fast. So that's the basics of sculpt mode. It's a bit more fun, not as complicated as going into edit mode and changing everything and making sure that objects are selected and in the right places. I'll just join that again. F3, join, one solid object. And since we're back in layout mode, we can see where the lights are that we use to make the northern light effect. They're right there. Going back into render mode, you can see that they're what's causing the lights at solid mode. And that's basically how you'll go about making this scene right here. The only thing different about this scene is that I went in to complete the shader nodes. Again, to just add a node. Shift A, search if you wanted the Veroni texture. You type Veroni, and then there it is. If you want to make 2 of it, you shift D, and that duplicates it. So instead of going and typing it in again, you can just click on it, shift D, and duplicate it. Again, wiring them together, you just click on and drag and release. To see the effects of what you did, you have to make sure that it connects back to the principled BSDF. If I disconnect this, it takes away the blue color ramp. If I disconnect the bumps from the normal, we'll get even more basic until it's back to what we made in this one. I have a good bit more lights included in this scene, which is why there's a nice glow and everything in there. Does anybody have any questions or things that they're wondering about? Things that they feel wasn't delved into enough? I think we started around 20 after 2, so I think we're around the 1 hour mark there now. I just wanted to make sure everyone's doing all right. They aren't lost. If you're lost, I can clarify things. Like, no problem if you're wondering about like adjusting things or changing the size, anything like that. I can help you with that.
If anybody has any questions, you can turn your cameras and your microphones on if you want to ask Bronson directly. You can also put things in the chat. Everybody's been following along, and you've got anything you want clarified, feel free to go ahead right now.
Again, sorry about not going more into the shaders. I wanted to make sure, like, because it's a lot easier just to throw a light in than fine tune the material to make it like transparent and everything like that. If you wanted to make the Igloo look like it's glowing like this one, it'll look exactly like that once you go into here in shader and then adding in the correct things, linking them up. I have the little map made that's going to be emailed out, so you'll find what you need to put in by the names here. So we added color ramp by Shift A, adding color ramp. Then there's the bump and noise texture. All these things is what gives you the look of this. So this whole glow thing is the light inside plus this web of nodes. I could go into it if you didn't mind like me going for another like 10 minutes, but I know we're already at like an hour or so, so I didn't want to keep everyone for way over time.
I think maybe we'll wrap it up there. We've just got 2 quick comments in the chat.
Okay.
Benito says, just wants to thank you for the good tutorial. And Glenn Gear also says, thanks Bronson for a great workshop. I've much to practice in Blender, but you helped make it easy to follow the basics.
Thank you.
So,
yeah, it's my first time doing any sort of tutorial, and I was concerned about going too fast. And at this point, I'm like pressing different things that might not be obvious, like control shifting and just like all the different hotkeys. So if anybody's wondering how I did something, you can definitely reach out and I could clarify it. If you're wondering about anything, it would be no problem for me to just clear things up. And I think that all you'll really need is to like rewatch the recording to figure out how to move things around, edit them. And if you refer to this map that I made of the nodes, it'll look like this, which is, it seems like there's a lot to do to make it look like this from what we just made, but it's just the shaders. The shaders are a very powerful but complicated part of Blender. So if you can look into this and you can Google different types of materials, you can find YouTube videos of people making different maps. So you can make grass and wood and everything that you want in this with a different layout. And there's a simplified version as well, which just shows like what's connected if this one's a bit too complicated.
Okay, so I think we will wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Bronson, for leading this workshop. It was really interesting. And yeah, and like we said, the this video of the workshop will be posted online. You can find it on our website probably within about a week. Also, those guides that Bronson created, if they haven't been emailed out to you yet, you will be getting them quite soon. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming, and yeah, we'll hopefully see you at the next one.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I hope the recording clears a few things up, and yeah, I'm glad I was able to do this. I feel like if more people were able to get into Blender, they could, or any other 3D program, they could make many amazing things. Something that would benefit sculpting and carving as well as like making something 3D first and then making sure it's just the way you look, and then you can do it. But yeah, making stuff in 3D has a lot of different benefits and uses. And if you learn Blender, you can just like, you can go to a different 3D program and do the same thing. And yeah, thanks for coming. I appreciate it.